All right. Well, welcome to another episode of Why Influence, where we interview influencers about their why and why they're sharing. Today, our guest is Jason, and Jason has a podcast called You Winning Life. He also has an Instagram account with over 8,000 Instagram followers. He's on LinkedIn. He's got about 1,700 followers there. But he's had a long journey from sharing. I know that he used to get F's in school to avoid speaking just so he didn't have to go up there, just get a zero. And today he's a public speaker, he's a podcaster, and it's just amazing the journey that he's taken. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on here, Jason.
My absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for hanging out with me today.
For sure. Uh, so can you briefly, in like 2 to 3 sentences, just give like an elevator pitch about your platforms and what they're all about?
Sure. So before I share with what I do, I'll share with you and the listeners what I believe, which is I believe that everybody out there needs a therapist and a coach in their life. And I kind of adopted that from one of my coaches, Coach Michael Bird, who believes that everybody needs a coach in their life. But as a therapist, my mission is to inspire health, hope, and happiness. And we all go through things in life that has led us to where we are now. And sometimes we need to unpackage that story and to allow ourselves to go from a place of stuckness to a place of freedom and empowerment. And one of my favorite things is to help people re-narrate that journey and to help them find the purpose and potential inside of them and help them bring that to the world. Very similar to your why influence and very inconsistency to your why influence theme.
For sure. So can you just give like 2 or 3 sentences about You Winning Life, what your podcast is about?
Yeah, so over the last number of years, my life has kind of ended up looking like four different verticals. One is as a licensed therapist. My interest has always been, like I just said, about bringing the inside and the best of the version inside and bringing it out. And I've done that through like different aspects of different niches in my clinical career. I have a certificate in sports performance psychology. I have a certificate in hypnosis and addictions. But most recently, over the last 5-6 years, has been as a neuro-emotional technique practitioner. And that's really become my bread and butter and one of my favorite things to do. And then outside of my job as a therapist, I used to be a full-time professional Jew. And by that, I meant I used to work for nonprofit organizations, both in synagogues and schools and campus life. And I realized that during all those things, I was really being a therapist without being a therapist, which led me to going to graduate school. And the podcast really does focus on the four things that I think round out my day, which is psychology, spirituality, entrepreneurship, and natural and alternative medicine. So the You Winning Life is really that if you sync those four pillars together, you will have an improved, successful, and empowered life experience.
Yeah, I love that. And so I'm friends with Jason. I know him. We met at a podcast conference. He's actually done one of his NET sessions on me. It's pretty powerful. You can dive deep really fast with that.
Yeah, it's been a gift. Actually, how it started for me as an NET practitioner, about 2011, 2012, I did a training at University of Miami's integrative medicine department. And one of the little modalities that they taught us at the time was NET. But they brought another practitioner in who was a chiropractor because NET actually came out of chiropractic for unresolved chronic pain that has an emotional component. And then years later, it's been around for about 35 years or more. But midway into the years that NET has been in existence, they started allowing therapists, licensed therapists, to do this modality. But the person who did the demo was a chiropractor who I subsequently over the years have become friends with and had some really positive influence on me because he connected me to my entrepreneurship program later on. But he did a demo that weekend. And at that time, I was going through a pretty big life crisis and I was having panic attacks. And including that weekend. And I was staying down at a hotel down there. And once I got back to my room, I had all these panic attacks, like being isolated and all these things. And about a month and a half, 2 months later, someone said, why don't you just go try this thing? Let me introduce you to my colleague. And I went to a therapy session and did NET. And within a few sessions, my panic attacks went away. And a month later after that, I took my first training with NET. So now this many years later, I hold one of their top certifications. So it's been an incredible, powerful experience for me, both as a client of, but also as a practitioner of.
That's amazing. So before we jump into your why, do do you mind sharing maybe like an unintended consequence or unintended impact that you've had recently as a result of sharing, or through your podcast or Instagram, or people that are seeing you share, somebody that you've impacted in a way you didn't expect? Do you mind sharing
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really cool to hear from people that I already know. Um, who've listened to my podcast. I know one of my clients who I was kind of shocked, um, pretty much like said to me, like, not only have they listened to it, but they've pretty much kept up to listening to all of it. And they're bringing in something that I would say on the podcast as something that they wanted to work on as they brought it into a therapy session, which was kind of cool. But there's also someone I met through some social networking that by listening to my podcast, they actually connected to one of the people I mentioned at the beginning was Coach Michael Burt, and is now doing an online program with him as they're developing their business, and we're still in touch. So I know that that person was really, really appreciative of that. But even more so through the whole podcast thing is how I met Pablo, our buddy Pablo, and through another mutual friend that I met online through social media when he found out that I was going to the podcast movement conference, he's like, you should meet my boy Pablo. Pablo and I met, then we met, and then we were right. And now, a few weeks ago, 2 weekends ago, we were together in Nashville at Pablo's house for our retreat.
Yeah.
So all right, unintended weaving and bobbing and all that stuff.
Yeah, it really does open doors.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's go to the beginning here, because you talked about how in school, this is before we're here, obviously, that you were saying that you were literally getting Fs on your grades just to avoid standing in front of class and speaking. And then I know that it's you've been sharing for a long time. You've done some pretty big speaking events on stage. So where did your whole sharing journey start? Would you say?
Yeah. So I want to add, not only was I afraid of doing any public speaking, but I think that like anything in public, um, I had such a complex or low, I don't know if it was like low self-esteem or embarrassment, or I haven't yet put my finger on it this many years later, but I can remember even going to like school dances and being like so uncomfortable, even though I was friendly with people and I had a bunch of friends, but I wasn't like the person who was loud and out and about in the crowd like some of my good friends were. And I remember the big switch for me was the beginning. I think it was 10th grade going into 11th grade. I was really involved in my synagogue's youth group called USY. And um, I was elected for a board position in our chapter. And each region, right? So our region was Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Puerto Rico. And each region would have like a summer week-long retreat at the end of the summer. And ours was at Camp Blue Star in Hendersonville, which is right where we were basically this past weekend or 2 weekends ago. And I remember the difference of walking around that weekend with an identity as I'm not just Jason, but I'm Jason, the guy who has this position, this leadership position, that I was somehow acknowledged for something that I can bring to the table. And somehow I was able to start differentiating between the old me of like, I'm just me, I don't have much to offer, to, I do have something to offer. I do have something to share. I do have something to teach. And then from there, as part of that position, I would actually have to get up and speak, or I'd have to get up and lead a service, or I'd have to get up and do something, right? Lead a program in my position. And it slowly started evolving from there. Now, doesn't mean I wasn't petrified still and had the same things like you described when you first spoke at your thing, where you came down hands sweating and all that stuff. But I think over the years it evolved and evolved and evolved. And then after I came back, after my first 2 years after high school, I went to study in Israel for 2 years, and I came back and I started teaching after school religious school at synagogues. And now all of a sudden I went from like talking to a small group of people to like having to run a class of like 20 kids. Right. And I think that's where my craft really developed, where this persona of being able to get in front and engage that I never knew was truly there started to happen. And then I guess my reputation of being an educator, an informal educator, started to grow with programming and classes and workshops and retreats over the years from that point.
So it's been just like sort of a iterative process over a journey that you're sharing has just been becoming more comfortable because you sort of eased into it with the board position that sort of elevated you. Then you had to lead like services and programs. then you evolved into like running classes, workshops, and retreats, and it's just been like stepping stones through that.
Yeah, in a way, I kind of like, and I do debate this now looking back, of course, like my therapist hat is on, where how much of it was ego, right? Wanting to have this, from an unhealthy ego place, but it was always coming from a genuine and sincere place. I always, as a therapist and as a coach, right? My position and my perspective is always, how can I be of use and a resource to somebody? But I do wonder as a teenager, and this was like pre-social media and all the technology, right? This is mid 90s, 94, 95, 96, where how much was it just to be accepted before I realized what my actual influential ability was? And I think thankfully to the personal development I've invested in over the years, where I was able to pivot from it being an egotistical, maybe an unhealthy egotistical perspective to more of a bringing out my purpose and my value to the world.
Okay. So where would you say that bringing out your purpose and value, like the first time that you feel like you intentionally did that, where did that start, or was it part of that journey?
So I think it was when I was teaching that after school religious school, and they actually went through 2 or 3 teachers within the first 2, 3 months of the academic school year in that program. And I don't remember exactly what I did, but I know that the principal, um, David Wolf, who I'm still in touch with off and on over the years, his son was in the class. It was 6th grade, and his son was in the class. And whatever it was, however did, either I jumped on the chair or I brought my guitar, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I did something so different than what was norm for that type of parochial education. And I think actually like Harry Potter just came out around then. So like, right, I was like referencing stuff that like, and trying to connect it into the topics. And I started realizing like that was kind of weaving all the different worlds together to make it a connection for the people I was working for, right? I was really working for the kids. I was working for 6th graders. And I didn't see it as they're there to do what I want them to do, but I'm here to serve them. And I think once I got that and I was able to connect with them at that level, that allowed that transition to really start um, happening. And I wanted to make sure, because we use this word now, especially right in the entrepreneur social media world, is like, how can I provide value? But I want to take it to a deeper level and say, like, how can I connect? How can I actually connect with them where they're at? Not where I want them to be with me, but what do they need at that developmental stage? Or what does someone need with me in a therapy session or a coaching session? Not here's where I want to get them to. And I think I started unpackaging that on an intellectual level years later, but then somehow that process, started off then in like 2000 and, 1999 ish.
Okay. So the earlier part of your journey was more of like conditioning you to sharing and being more comfortable sharing. But then when it really felt like it was more purposeful was when you were doing the 6th grade class where you could start, making a difference and making an impact on these kids.
Yeah, and I think right the why influence question, right? The theme of your podcast is, as we talked about a little bit ago offline, was how do you bring your truest, deepest purpose to the world? And that's like, that would be my answer. It's like, how do you, right? And the theme of our retreat with Pablo was, how do you show up? Right? How I show up. And I really wanted to find a way to make spirituality cool in some way, shape, or form for these kids who are obligated to be going after school to this program, who would rather probably be playing sports or video games at that time. And how do I bring, how do I make it really worthwhile and create a long-standing, lasting relationship
All right.
with them?
So I like that. So let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah.
So why is it so important for you to make spirituality cool for the kids?
Because parochially, it sucks, right? When you think about any type of spiritual thing, first thing that people most typically will go into will be like, oh, religion, and religion is very dogmatic, or it's very in the box, or it's only happening inside a certain type of building, whether it's a church, a synagogue, a mosque, whatever it may be. And we know today, right, in 2020, that like people are a lot more in touch with their inner self, right, through yoga and meditation and working out and exercise and eating healthy, that I do believe that those are all spiritual paths to getting to know yourself better, right? If you know what your body needs to run itself at a highest version, you know which fuel you need to give it to yourself, like that's going to allow you to be the best version of yourself. If you know what you need to relax besides sitting and Netflixing and chilling, and you know that like, recharging your battery by being away from everybody or recharging your battery by going out into nature, I think that's a really spiritual experience. But I also realized that entrepreneurship, which has been the newest branch of my practice over the last couple of years, I do believe is a method of empowerment. And if done right, if you really look at not just like how can I build a business right and get my Lambos and my yachts, but how can I build a legacy in the world where I'm not only taking care of the people I care about, but I can also help empower other people through that, I think is a very spiritual practice as well.
Yeah. Okay. So what I got was that you want to help people be the best versions of themselves, and showing that spirituality is cool is just a component of that. But whatever they see as whatever is spiritual to them is what's important. Is that they feel like that is something that they're comfortable, going into and being open about, so that they can be the best versions of themselves.
Yeah, it's true authenticity, right? I joke with my clients. I'm like, I don't care where you pray, and I don't care who you sleep with, and I don't care who you sleep with, even if you're praying at the same time. Just be a good person.
Yeah. So why is it so important that you help these kids feel like they can be so authentic, and be so that they can be like the comfortable being the best versions of themselves?
So back then, right, I was 20 to 22, 23 years old in that time frame, right, 19, 20, 21, when I first started teaching. And I personally came out of my own parents' divorce, and was still going on actually during that time. That happened, it was probably 5, 6, 7 years from beginning to like actual done legal side of that whole process. And I know what it was like to have to be going through that. The stigma, right? Not now, unfortunately, divorce is way more rampant, but back then, like it was like probably one in our family social groups. I think my parents were the first divorce in our family's social group from our community. But I was also older than my two siblings, so I had a little bit more of knowledge of what was going on behind the scenes, even though I was still in high school, and I wasn't as savvy as I thought I was. But I definitely felt the brunt of it and felt different. Um, I felt different from that. I felt different because I was 5'2". I was, back then, like maybe I was the same height, but I was never a tall kid. So I had all these things of like feeling different, seeing myself as different. And I really wanted to help kids find a way to identify their value and like what's unique. And any type of therapy / education / personal development is really, I think, about finding uniqueness, right? I think that's, why people start businesses, that they have something unique to offer the world, or some type of thing that they created that's unique that they can do better than someone else. But I think it does start off with kids that age. I do think it starts off that you can really empower someone on a mission early on. And one of the questions that I love asking to my clients now, if they're like, so I see families and couples and adults and businesses, but when I'm working with a kid, I won't say, what do you want to be when you get older? Right? Where do you want to go to school? What do you want to be? It's like, okay, why do I really will ask a fifth grader, like, so why do you think you're here in the world? And go like beyond all the other stuff. And you'll get some really interesting answers, because a lot of adults aren't asking that. They're like, oh, where do you want to go to school? What do you want to be when you're older? And they're like, how do you want to change the world? How do you want to have an influence on other people? Right? Very much like, the questions you're asking me. And I think that we don't give kids enough credit that they might actually have a really profound and powerful answer that might actually scare the person that's asking them, because that person themselves hasn't thought about their own journey. So
Right.
how could I ask a kid that if I haven't figured that out for myself?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So then, why is it so important that these kids find what's uniquely valuable about themselves? And because that's, you talked about how you went through this the parent divorce situation, and you're like teaching this class, and you want to help them find the unique value. But so like, what's the big picture there? Like, why is that so important that these kids find their value?
So I'll answer it from the perspective first of that we all have unresolved trauma and drama that we've been through. And if that trauma and drama builds up over time, that can become our main narrative about ourselves. And the more momentum that has, the more difficult it's going to be to look at things in your world from a different perspective. So if we can get there early enough and build a sense of self, a sense of identity, a sense of worth, a sense of belonging, a sense of value, and help kids especially extract what's specifically unique about them. And I'm not talking about like this idea of like everybody gets a participation trophy, right? That's very generic. And I know some people are like very extreme about like dogging that. Like you don't just show up and get a trophy for showing up, right? But I think that we as adults can spend time with a kid and help them craft. No different than what you asked me, like, what's my elevator marketing pitch? What is a kid, right? I think we can ask kids the same question, like, what is it that is so unique about you? And if it's like, I can, do 100 jump ropes without, that's really cool. Like I can't do 100 jump ropes without hitting, without messing up, right? Cool. Can you teach that to somebody else? Why is that so fun for you? What's so fun about jump roping? Like, what do you enjoy about it? What's the feeling you get from it? Oh, it makes me feel excited and free. Oh, okay. Can you teach someone else how to feel excited and free too? Right? It's leverage in a way. And if they can feel excitement about that, then they're going to walk into another experience with confidence and belief that like there's something really special about them. And again, it doesn't have to be that they're going to be Einstein or they're going to be whatever but everybody has that uniqueness that they can offer someone else that might, change someone else's life.
I love that. That's really powerful. I mean, so the kids get to get the confidence and the beliefs that they need, that they are uniquely amazing and whatever it is that they actually are uniquely amazing at. And to me, that sounds very synonymous with the You Winning Life podcast that you're doing today. Maybe not necessarily focused on the children, but it sounds like you found that purpose around that time, and then you've been pretty consistent along the way.
Yeah, and I think, right, the title "You Winning Life," and I so wanted to avoid being cliche of like the what's his name, the winning thing from the guy from Two and a Half Men, because I think like, oh, is that like? I'm like, nah, it's nothing. It's really like you winning life is how do you become the most successful version of yourself? And again, it's not about the dollar amount; it's about feeling good when you go to bed. It's about waking up with purpose. It's about having your own mission. How do you connecting with others and I think you can see that by like the community that we're co-creating together with our group of people, that everybody is trying to uplift everybody else. And um with all the trauma and drama going on around, especially right now during this pandemic, I made a commitment to myself that I took all the news apps off my phone about a year and a half ago. And so I will limit myself to watching for checking out on the news, maybe for only 5 or 10 minutes a day. So this morning, when I was making my coffee, I popped on the news app, and one of the first things that popped up on CNN was Khloe and Kim Kardashian get into a major fight on their show. Like that made the news.
Right.
And the fact that has like, I'm like, okay, do people need that much of an extreme distraction, right now with what's going on in our pandemic, that should actually take priority? But even if that wasn't happening, the pandemic wasn't happening, that would be a priority. That would be still there. So I think like my focus on like helping people streamline where they should be putting their attention to, where they should putting their efforts to. We did the exercise, 5 fingers, 5 priorities, right? You have 5 fingers. And if I followed you around every day, like making a documentary, I would only see you doing those 5 things that you say are the most important to you. Otherwise you're out of alignment. You're being inauthentic to yourself. So I'm wondering, like right now with everything going on, like I think the podcast really is, how can I help empower people with information they didn't know, or something that they would never know existed, in a way that could be useful from people who have already achieved a high level of success in their area.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And,
I mean,
and they don't have to be billionaires and millionaires. It could be people like us who are really passionate about what we're passionate about, and we're using that to connect with other people.
yeah, that's amazing. It's a really powerful why. I mean, it's clear that it's been consistent for the most part, with some evolutions to the process since that time that you were doing the high school program with the kids to where you are today.
Yeah, it's a blessing to be able to do it, because I know, especially with what's going on right now, we're all isolated, right, in our homes, that I can literally only have been seeing my clients for whatever online schedule time I've had, and just been literally have nothing else to do. And I'm trying to find a way. And I would say it's definitely coming from a place of healthy selfishness, of setting up like 20-minute Zoom check-ins for people who like or out there that might know me through my social media, be like, hey guys, like if you want some support and you want some love, this is not a therapy call, but if you want to just reach out, like let's check in for 20 minutes. Like it feels good for me to do that. And I'll admit that like it's definitely coming from a little bit of a selfish place, but it's coming from a healthy selfish place because I do want to be of service and I do want to be useful and helpful. And I do keep that ego in check. But, uh, again, like I said before, like I'm done playing small. And
Yeah.
I think that the podcast, which I
So
never
so
thought I
let's
would have.
yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, when you were in school, you were getting Fs in grades because you weren't studying in front of the class. To now you're studying in front of a class to help inspire these kids to find, their confidence and the beliefs they need to be the best people that they can be. So during that journey, you found a purpose that helped push you to overcome a lot of barriers. So like, what are some of the times where you gave yourself permission, and like, what kind of barriers did you overcome, and how did you overcome
Yeah.
them?
So there's definitely layers of that. Um, I think right at that time it was whatever beliefs I unconsciously or unaware of held about myself, my family, my height, my identity. Um, that high school age side, like what was the public persona of Jason versus the like when I would be home, how isolated and how alone I would feel. Um, Even as I share with my therapy clients, I always say like I don't want you to think that I'm coming from a place of like one upping you, that I know better than you or that I'm like this world's greatest expert on something. And that's not where my training as a therapist is. We're trained to be pattern identifiers and pattern interrupters and to challenge beliefs, assumptions, and expectations. And I play the role of a one down with a lot of curious questions, very much the way that your interview style is. And I think that like I have no problem. And like they always talk about like how much do you share in a therapy, like self-disclosure, therapy self-disclosure from the therapist. And like if I find it relevant to a client, I'm not going to give them like a whole dump of whatever's going on, but I'm like, oh yeah, I remember when I went through something like that. And I know that's kind of like people are very binary about it in the therapy world. You never self-disclose. And some people like it's okay as long as it's this. And whatever. I'm like, I've been doing this long enough to like know when it might be okay, when it might not be okay. But I think like saying like, yeah, I've been depressed.
Yeah.
I've had panic attacks and anxiety. I've gone to therapy for it. I've tried psychiatric medication for it at a certain point. I've tried homeopathy and acupuncture and herbs and chiropractic and nutrition. And you're not alone in whatever process you're going through because if I didn't go through it, I can guarantee you I've either had a client go through it or someone else I know
So was
go through
that
it.
you giving yourself permission to have those things? Is that maybe a part of during that transition?
Yeah, right. It's the permission that I don't have to be perfect in order to be able to be helpful to somebody else. I don't have to have it all figured out in order to help someone else. Um,
So how did you overcome that? You made the realization like you've been depressed, you've had anxiety, you've been to therapy, and now you're feeling like you can help people, and you don't have to be perfect to do that. So like, what steps did you take to go from point A to point B there?
so I definitely think the therapy process of my own personal therapy post 2010 when I got divorced was that I had some really awful therapists. And knowing going in from being a therapist, and I loved my program, the family therapy program at Nova that I went to was an incredible, incredible, incredible non-diagnosis based. It's not about the pathology and you have this or you are this. It was about the relational dynamics and your beliefs and your patterns and your interactions with. And I started realizing that like there's not there's some really amazing therapists out there, but there's a lot of not good therapists out there. In fact, I'm finding that a lot of people who are calling to find a therapist, I would dare say that at least 50 to 75% of the therapists they call don't even call back if they don't answer the phone right off the bat, which is mind blowing. Um, and so I think my personal journey of like seeing what's out there and the value that I got more out of talking to a good buddy of mine and buying him a cup of coffee was exponentially more therapeutic than actually paying a professional psychologist. Really shocked me into seeing not from an egotistical perspective of but holy crap, I actually do a really good job with my clients and I have a really good reputation. And I see that because clients will take a break and 2 3 4 years later they'll call me back versus when I see an intake form and I'll see that they went to 2 or 3 other therapists, and I'll ask them, why didn't you go back there? Because they'll write like, what name, list your previous therapy, and then I have a box, how helpful was it, and please describe. And they'll say, yes, it was incredibly helpful. And I'm like, why aren't you going back there? If it was that helpful, why are you calling me? And like, well, it
Right.
really wasn't. They were really nice, but I didn't get much out of it. Oh, okay. So you want really nice, you want to connect to them, but you also want process and to be challenged. And I feel like that, maybe I was able to bring both of those together. And I think that's something that I have learned, that I can be playful. I can joke around with my clients, but I can also call them out on a pattern with a lot of love.
Yeah, and that's something that I've seen a lot is a lot of the help that people get to overcome these challenges are going to be people that are in your network. So it could be a friend that you go buy a cup of coffee with, and he's able to help you overcome the situation that you're in, or the barrier that you're telling yourself, or the barrier that you can't even see. A lot of times that they can help you identify it, or come up with ways to support you through it.
Yeah. And one thing I want to challenge to people who are listening to this live or will be listening to this later is that if you have the need to reach out to a friend about a particular issue you're going through, before you do that, ask them permission to get into that space with them. Because a lot of times I hear from the people who it's been dumped on that, well, one that might be a boundary thing for that person in the first place who's getting it dumped on. But I find that a lot of people out there just go into it and like unload and unleash on the other person as if they are their therapist without asking their friends permission
That's a good point.
to be in that role. And that we just assume that just because they're your friend, they're supposed to listen to all your crap all the time and just debrief on them. No, like right, this is something that I feel is really, really important. And there's
Yeah,
gonna be
show
people who
your
are gonna do that
respect.
anyway, but right. So, but on one side, right, mind your boundary, be okay, give yourself permission. I know that's why you and I we talk about the permission a lot. Give yourself permission to say no. That's out of my pay grade. Right, I don't have confidentiality clearance for that one. Or to push it off and say, listen, now is not the right time for me. But if you're the person who needs the help, ask consent, ask for permission.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Uh, so something that I've recently incorporated into the show is, you can share what you're comfortable sharing, but like income sources, because a lot of influencers can draw income from different sources. You've been public speaking for a while. You're sort of newer to podcasting, but you're
Mm-hmm.
still, a little ways into it. So do you mind sharing just
Sure.
like high level of like, where your income sources are coming from and how like the podcast or your speaking is, contributing to that?
Yeah. So I think for years, until my private practice, so I'll kind of give it in a chronological sequence if that'll make more sense. Um, I graduated. When did I go? Graduate school was 2005 is when I graduated from graduate school. So from 2003 to 2005, while I was doing graduate school, which was a full-time program, but it was in the afternoons twice a week, which was incredible. It was like Mondays and Wednesdays or something like that, from like 3 to 9. So I was able to work, and I was working at a synagogue at that time as a youth director, and doing adult education and programming and workshops and other nonprofit Jewish organizations. So I had a consistent salary coming in, right? I knew what I was getting paid from the day job. And then I had this community education program I was working for, and that was like per diems for the course or for the semester. Here and there, I was actually tutoring for bar and bat mitzvahs. So I was making some extra shekels on the side, and here and there. And I think it was 2000 and 2003, 2004, 2005. So I would say about 2005, 2006. I was sorry, the 2006, 2007 year is when I left my day job in the community full time and started working for an agency for a mental health agency. And I hated it. My boss was great. He actually was one of my Hebrew teacher from high school son. So I was very thankful for that connection. And it was a great paying gig, but it was completely not with the population that I loved. And going back to like we were talking about before about people being in a platform that they don't love, but the money might be there, or they hate the platform and the money's not there. You really have to, I can see how people can get stuck in it because it's, there's security at that. But I was still doing those programs in the afternoon and evening. And I joined a private practice at that time where I started building up a small caseload, one client a week, two clients a week, right? And there's always critical mass in numbers, right? And then when I saw that I was actually at the beginning of it getting to the next level of critical mass is when I resigned from my agency job and went full-time into private practice. But meanwhile, I was still keeping that after school community programming, education stuff coming in. And after a bunch of years, knowing that I had a limit in a private practice of how much I could make working for someone else, I then jumped into my own private practice. So if I realized like that they're taking an overhead amount from me every month and it was like 40%, as long as I was taking home 39% of my own income, I was still doing better than working for someone else. But I didn't realize, oh yeah, I got to now take out the garbage. I got to do my marketing, my advertising, answer the phone. So there was like these developmental stages of being an entrepreneur that sometimes it is better to be an entrepreneur and have your overhead taken out, that percentage taken out off the top, than having to mop your own floor at the end of the week. But right now, being full-time in private practice, I have previous to the pandemic, I had a full in-person private practice for therapy and coaching. I do have an associate therapist who's a licensed therapist. I do have a chiropractor who works in my practice, and I do have a nutritionist. So, right, that's coming in from that perspective. But I also have my online coaching where I'm working with professionals, young professionals, businesses, family businesses online. And my podcast has been actually not a monetization effort, but a marketing platform where if someone's going to Google me, they're going to also see all the people I'm interviewing and all the topics I'm talking about and be like, oh, wow, maybe this guy knows a little bit more than the other therapist out there. Because when you search and you see who's showing up in the topics, they're going to see a little bit more influence than someone else who just might be a therapist.
So speaking of that, have you had anyone reference that, or have you had the feeling or, the impact as a result of, having the podcast out there as a therapist?
Yeah, I know someone, I know that there has been through social media that a few people have reached out to me since that. And I get it's a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I really wasn't using social media for anything beyond personal. I wasn't doing Instagram. I wasn't, and it grew in them, and I can see the content shifting and changing more towards very specific personal development in my podcast than just like, sitting outside of Starbucks, like the average person might do, where it's on point and on message.
So the podcast has been helping give you credibility, and for both your therapist business as well as your coaching business.
Yeah, and it's also an additional resource. So like if there's something I'm talking about in a therapy or coaching session, I can reference an episode and say, oh, like, I mentioned this concept, go to episode whatever and hear Rick Sapio talk more about your 5 priorities, and, what you absolutely say yes to and what you should absolutely say no to, or a reference to a podcast that I've been on as a guest. And like, or I started actually, like we were talking about public speaking. There was only been a few times where I've monetized my public speaking. And because I've been so busy with my private practice that I haven't had time and free time to really build that up and advertise it and market it without having someone help me do that. But one of the things that I'm taking advantage of right now is creating a media marketing kit, like a one sheet type thing, which we talked about on the retreat a few weeks ago, putting it out there to do a TED Talk, which was one of the things that we did. The first thing that we started off retreat, that everybody gave their version of a TED Talk. And I know your wife is a TED Talk speaker. But the importance of like getting out there and speaking more and then using that as a monetizing leverage brand, right? I want to work with people, whether it's a business, a group, a person, a family. I do love what I do. And yes, I'd like to be paid for speaking as well, in retreats and stuff like that. But I haven't yet monetized it to the extent of where I could. And that's the next goal.
But you're still early in the journey, but it's pretty cool to see that, you're in the transition of that journey, right? Like by having this podcast, it's bringing you business, giving you credibility, giving you tools to give to your clients so like it has a reason to be there, has a reason to put effort into it. And it's bringing you, sort of unintended income in a way. It's just sort of rolling people in through that. And over time, it's going to grow into something bigger that then maybe can become its own thing on its own someday. So I think that's an interesting way, because a lot of people I bring on the show are already full-time or on the cusp, like literally on the cusp of like quitting their job.
Yeah.
So to see that you're able to use it as like it's a slower transition, but it's like helping you through the whole journey.
Well, I think the strategic transition I have is that I actually have a brick and mortar business. and I'm not relying on. So I have a ton of friends in the professional speaking community, and I know for a fact that one person already lost $40,000 just in this time period of business. I know
Yeah.
another person who has an entire summer program that he does that is done, right? And it's a travel summer program, and it's an incredible. It's actually, he's out of Atlanta, and he was someone I've known since my youth group. He was a youth director in Atlanta, and he's doing this incredible social action program. It's called Etgar, and right, his business is like frozen. So I think that I'm so thankful that that I'm able to pivot right now, that my business was able excuse me, to go fully online for. And I did have to talk some of my clients into it, to be like, oh no, I only want to see you in person, and I want to wait until I'm like, there may not be a back in my office 3 months from now. I might just do this, and I'm happy to give you a referral to another therapist if that's what you want. But if you want to continue working with me, try it once, and I guarantee you that you're not going to hate it. And I was able to pivot to being fully online, but I know a lot of people aren't, and it's really difficult. But I think, though, the advantage I have maybe to other public speakers, and I had this conversation with someone who's been dancing in the public speaking world, versus they were working for a nonprofit and they were doing public speaking on the side, and now they're fully public speaking. They got no jobs, and you can command $2,000-$3,000 doing something online
Right.
when people are now giving away everything for free in this
Right.
economy, right? In the next 90 days, karate, right? We were talking about someone previously, right, about the karate thing, and everybody's doing their stuff for free to bring value during this time, and they may have their, but I would say for people out there who want to be speakers, you have to plan for stuff like this. You have to plan long term. You have to have some type of passive income coming in. It's kind of like, what's your day job and what are you doing for fun?
Right.
And I think this proves it right now with this economy, with what's going on, that you're going to be an add-on. Like, people aren't going to be paying two, three, $1,000, $500, $1,500, whatever it's going to be, if their business is 6 months behind on payment with
Yeah.
what's going on right now.
So I think that it's good that you position yourself. You're already on the trajectory of doing more remote work. You already have a podcast out there. You're getting the technology in place. So now that if someone's looking up a therapist, they just might think even more highly of you, because it's like, oh, this is a tech savvy guy. Like, he probably won't mind doing web calls and stuff. So
Right. And I'm putting that out there also. So here's like just a little mindset pivot, and this is going above and beyond. Right. We were talking about previously about all the businesses that got created during the last economic downturn, right? Venmo and Uber and Airbnb, those all came out of like the last economic downturn. But right now, like, people are, if you're waiting around, if you have a business and you're waiting around for someone to reach out to you, you need to be incredibly proactive. You need to be reaching out to anybody you've ever worked with. You need to be sending video voice messages. I just had this conversation with my sister a little bit ago, because we have a third generation family furniture business. And I'm like, send a video to every designer you've ever worked with and just say hello and how can we help you during this time. By the way, we're still working fully online. So if you have any design things that need to be handled and you're just too overwhelmed, we can help you take care of that, right? Whatever it is, but reach out to everybody you've ever been in touch with, and don't just send a text, send a video if you're not going to call them, right? But I want to challenge people to like find a new way to pivot in this economy. So I'm in network with TRICARE, which is the military insurance. So I went on Facebook Monday or Tuesday, today's Friday, and I typed in Florida military, Florida Navy, Florida Army, right? Whatever it is. And I found every single Facebook group that's relevant to Florida military. And of the 10 groups, I whittled it down to 3 or 4 that I can actually become a member of without being an active or veteran military service person. Of the 3 that I was able to actually be part of, only 1 allowed marketing. So I went from 10 to 1. And I posted in there, my name is Jason. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm licensed in Florida. If you're a Florida resident and you're in network with TRICARE and you're looking for a therapist that you want to find online due to what's going on, please reach out to me. Here's my email. Here's my phone number. So that was Tuesday. I saw that it got accepted in the group yesterday around lunchtime. At 7:45, I got an email from someone in that group that's now scheduled for next week as a new client. So I wouldn't have thought to do that had this pandemic not been around.
Right. Yeah, you're looking at alternative
I got to
solutions.
I got to create. I got to create new
It's a good
right now.
idea.
Right. So I want to challenge people to find a way in their specific area right now. What's the new thing that you can create as an income? Because we were just talking about income streams. What's the new thing you can create right now that people are still willing to spend their money on, even if they may not be making, like, I'm looking at like a workout bench. I'm in my home office, but I'm looking at a workout bench. I can't go to my gym downstairs. I can only really run. God bless Peloton. I don't know if people know this. I want to give a crazy shout out to this company. People are like, oh, it's overpriced and everything. They're doing 90-day free. If you go on their app, you can sign up for 90 days for free without a credit card to any of their workout programs, yoga, spinning. You don't need a Peloton bike. If you have a bike in your house, go online for 150 bucks, 200 bucks. You can buy a bike trainer that you can attach your bike to. You don't have to spend $2,000. And you can do their spinning class. You can do their workout classes. You can do their meditation classes. It's free. Like, everybody's bringing so much value right now. And they found a way. And guess what? They're probably going to get some customers who are going to be, it's only $57 a month to now get their Peloton bike finance free. I can afford that. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it is. So speaking of all this advice you've been going into, for what would be the biggest advice you'd give to like a new influencer, like someone that's like maybe not even sharing yet, or maybe just started sharing? Like, what would be some of the biggest advice that you would give this person?
So the first thing I can think of is, having journeyed through the social media entrepreneur spaces over the last couple of years, is that you first need to realize that you probably should not be advertising yourself as a CEO, or that you're a company. And if you're just a person who's like going out there and you're starting something, there's a difference between you being you doing something and you having an actual business around it. So if you haven't first mapped out what your long-term business growth is, versus like, I just need to get one client and then I need to get two clients, but what's your full actual business strategy map, where you're not going to be doing everything, then you're not starting off from you're not starting off from a position of power. You're actually starting off from a position of being Superman or Superwoman. And you're not thinking about how you can actually grow this strategically from that point. Number two, this whole like mentality of like being a social media influencer. What are you actually bringing to the table? Like, and this is really a check yourself before you wreck yourself moment. That is, this coming from a place of ego, or are you coming from a place of actual expertise? Are you truly the best person that has proven, demonstrated capacity in that specific niche to solve a problem? And then go from there. And like you said before, when we were talking about from your experience of being coming from a place of vulnerability, Hank Norman, who's this really awesome person who helps people bring out their influence. He helped create Oprah's network, and he was helped create The View, and he's been behind Grant Cardone and a bunch of other people, Mel Robbins, is don't tell me what you do, show me what you do. So one of the things that I'm going to start doing on my podcast is actually showing coaching sessions, having some of the actual episodes be me coaching people.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
I can't tell you, right? I can't show you a
Document.
therapy session. I can't, but it's going to be a non-therapeutic conversation, right? It's a very specific coaching, not therapy. But I can actually demonstrate and show what I'm doing. So show your proof of what you're actually doing, not, oh, I'm going to help you build a six-figure business. If you've never made $100,000 before on your own, you can't, don't tell me that you're going to help me build a six-figure business. I even like bust the balls of my friends who are in the financial planning world. And they're like, right, I have this joke that I know if I haven't heard from a friend in a long time, they probably just went into financial planning and they're going through the Rolodex. So I won't hire someone who has not proven that they're making 10 times more money than me when it comes to financial planning. If you're making around the same as me, I don't want you telling me how to make money.
Right.
I want to be there, not where you're at. Right. So show your proof positive, show your results, get the testimonials. I think that's a key thing. Right. And it can't just be like someone making it up, like, but show your proof positive, and come across with humility. I think that's also a big thing, right? That everybody like, I have TikTok, and as a 41-year-old therapist, I have TikTok because I do want to see what's going on out there, but I also want to see what other professionals are doing. And I do believe that Gary Vee's like, if you don't have a business and you're now not on TikTok, you're missing out on a brand. You were talking about one of your guys who, right, built up a
Yeah.
huge TikTok
Yeah,
following.
just the other day, one of my previous guests, I didn't even know he had a TikTok. He just had a bunch of YouTube and Facebook followers, and had a big podcast. And then just during the conversation, he's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I've got 500,000 TikTok followers."
Right.
It's like, oh okay,
And you can get that in 30 days. Right, with the way TikTok, right? And I know like a lot of people, especially Gary Vee, talks about like, right, TikTok is the new Instagram and Instagram is the new Facebook, but eventually it's right. You have the ability now to create something that you're gonna be an early adopter versus like, oh, that's only for 15-year-old girls and it's only for like stupid things and like I don't get it and it's so inappropriate and whatever. But you can leverage it right now. And, better to be the early adopter than the late person who then has to pay 5 times as much to get on it to market and advertise your stuff when that happens, when it really starts monetizing.
yeah, that's all huge advice. A bunch of different pieces of advice, but all huge. So let's say you meet an established, let's say podcaster, and or maybe someone around the same as far as in their journey as you are. What are some of the things that you feel like is your secret sauce that you're doing different than someone else that's out there?
So I think the first thing that I want people to ask is when I'm now sending emails out to confirm any guests, I will now ask, is there anything that you, and I asked you this question before, right? When we were doing you as a guest on my show, is there any topic that you're recently very passionate about? Or is there something that you wish that you would be asked about that you are not, and wish that you were? And get something a little bit deeper than just the average talking points that person is going on every single show and doing, right. We talked a little bit on about you being a husband and wife entrepreneurs, right, about you and Crystal. And I haven't had it, like I said, I haven't had anybody on my show. I've had husband entrepreneurs and I've had wife entrepreneurs, but I've never had the ability to get into that question with any of them of what's it like for both of you to be entrepreneurs in your own spaces and your own expertise. So I think like find something that you bring differently. Don't ask the same canned questions. Really be thoughtful. If you do have time in advance, prep, watch their YouTube videos, listen to a few of their podcasts, hear their styles, but don't ask the same question that's over and over again that they're asked on other podcasts. I love the questions that you're asking because you're asking a question, then you're getting under it, and then you're getting under that, which I really appreciate as a therapist because it's a really psychological process. So people out there, take heed of what Jeremy's doing on there. And sure. And but find a way to also don't plug them on your show before they feel they have to like be uncomfortable to plug themselves.
Of course.
Right. Know the names of the places in which they can already, at least the main places, right? I know what I tried to do for you was like in the middle of the show, like guys, listen to it, download right now if you're not driving, right? So guys, if you're listening to Jeremy right now and we're on his platform and you aren't subscribing to Jeremy's podcast, Why Influence, take 30 seconds right now while you're listening to this live stream, go on your iTunes, Spotify, wherever else, and I want you to subscribe right now to Why Influence. And I want you to go on iTunes, and literally this will take you guys 30 seconds. Go on iTunes, leave a review, hit 5 stars, and say, Jeremy is awesome. Just do that. It'll take you 2 minutes. Do that favor for me. If you found any value today out of anything that Jeremy's been saying, Jeremy and I, that I've been saying today, please do that for me. Do me a personal favor and go on Jeremy's iTunes and leave him a 5-star written review.
Well, thanks, Jason, and thank you in advance for leaving a 5-star review. But also, I was going to do it more towards the end, but I'll do it here. Definitely go check out Jason's podcast because I was actually just a guest on his. So if you're going to listen to any episode, you can start with that one.
Definitely start with that one. It's not out yet. It might take, we have to both edit that, but both
it'll be out there.
But subscribe so you won't miss out on.
Subscribe. You'll see it pop up in the feed, and listen to that. If you liked how it went and how the flow is, then definitely give him a subscribe. Give him a nice review on iTunes because that's important to everyone that has a podcast. The reviews help you get bigger and better guests. They also help you, show up in search algorithms. And Jason's got an awesome podcast, very authentic, and he's just trying to make the world a better place. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
definitely help those people out.
Yeah, I know when I started doing well, I'm not concerned about my numbers, right? That's one thing I think what new podcasters need to forget about is just putting out really good value and really good content. And again, like that value has become the Lululemon of yoga pants, right? That word value. But put out good content, put out really meaningful, thoughtful things. I don't care about my numbers. I really don't. I actually had someone who had over 100,000 followers who's written a bunch of books and's been on Oprah. And I reached out to him and their response was, how many listeners do you get? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to try. This is like a classic handling objection sales pitch. So I wrote back and I didn't even mention how many followers I have. And it's not thousands and thousands and thousands per an episode. And I'll admit that. I'm not embarrassed to admit that. Right. I wrote back, thank you so much for responding. I'm actually really excited to have you on the show. Let me share with you who's already been interviewed and a little, like in a sentence blurb about each person. And let me tell you who's already said yes. I didn't once mention how many people listen to my show. And that's what I sent to them. And an hour later, I got back, so-and-so would love to be on your show. So for all of you out there who are concerned about reaching out to people who have 50, 70, 100,000 download, whatever it is, focus on the value and the content that you're bringing and the proof that you're already doing this and that you're really passionate about it. And don't focus on the numbers.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I would add to that sharing your mission with that, so that the person can be like, okay, well, I'm also giving a service and doing a world of service by being a guest and sharing this knowledge. So you can get around not saying the numbers if they're trying to ask for it. Usually, if someone's asking that, they don't tend to be the kind of guests I'm looking for.
Right.
But there's ways around it, and that's great advice.
Yeah. And if you are reaching out to someone to invite them onto their show, be very specific with the reason why you want them. And why, whether it's a personal thing, like you've already been following them for a while, or you just learned about them and you just love some specific piece of content they put out, or like I shared before about going on Amazon and looking at the books that haven't been released yet and then finding people that are relative to that and say, like, I already pre-ordered your book. Would you please do me a favor I'd love to talk about it. I don't have your book yet, but I pre-ordered because it looks amazing. Would you mind being on my show so we can help you hype that up because it sounds so amazing, right? Bring something worthy to them.
I actually just did that the other day with Mark Metry. He wrote a book called Stop Being Shy. So he's very aligned with the purpose of this podcast. I had him as a guest before, and he's got a really successful podcast. And he sent an announcement saying the book's out. So I bought it on Amazon, sent him a message. Hey, if you want, we can do a follow-up, interview talking about your book. And, I'm very authentic about it. I want to check the book out, but I'm also going to tell him that I'm trying to help him and on his journey. And so that he came on the podcast again and shared a ton of wisdom. So it's
right.
awesome.
You're basically creating a leverageable relationship where it's a good for all. And I think that's like one of the beautiful things about creating a podcast community where I went through, I give a plug to a buddy of mine, Matt Monero, who's been an influence on me and a mentor and a friend. He has a great podcast called You Need More Money. And some of the people I actually have become friends with through the social has been people I reached out to from his podcast. And he's actually was one of the big reasons and influenced on why I started mine. But I started going down the list of like, which episodes did I really love? And I started reaching out to people on there and be like, you are awesome on Matt's podcast. Would you be willing to be a guest on mine? Oh, and by the way, like, this is how Matt and I know each other. So, right, I'm leveraging my relationships in a way that's authentic and not just a name drop, but like, these are the people I have connections with, a mutual relationship with. So, right, if there's anybody, right, so if you're out there and you're listening to my podcast or you're listening to Jeremy's podcast and there's a guest that you really liked, listen to that episode on his show or on my show and then reach out to that person and see if they're right. And I think that'll be another, and then mention the relationship, right? Like, oh, I'm actually friends with Jeremy, or I'm actually friendly with Jason, or whatever it may be. Or you don't even have to know us personally, right? But just, I heard you, I loved it. I love these 3 points. Would you be willing to come on as a guest to my show?
Great advice. Yeah. I mean, it's a big challenge to, find the right approach to get especially the large guests that a lot of times you're trying to reach, people that are, levels above where you're at,
Mm-hmm.
and got to have different tactics that you can use
Yeah.
to get them.
Yeah. But always do it with a smile and with a positive, like,
Yep.
we're going to get rejected. There's people who haven't responded back to me, but, like I said, like Howard Behar from Starbucks, right? That was like my big, massive name leverage brand. People know Howard Schultz, but they don't necessarily know Howard Behar, unless you're like really in the big entrepreneur, conscious capitalist community, or I forgot the other aspect of it that he works in. But then the philosophy of that type of business. Um, but that was a big ask. And the fact that he said yes really now gave me internal motivation to be like, now I can ask anybody. If that guy said yes, then I can now leverage that internally, even if I never mentioned, oh yeah, well, so and so said yes to me,
Yeah, you
right?
got
But
that.
now
So you
that
got that confidence.
I got that confidence out of it, yeah, that there's something that he said, yeah, I'm happy to spend an hour, and he was the nicest, like he's literally like everybody's grandpa. And this was pre the pandemic, right, hitting Seattle first. But like at the end of the thing, we had another 5-minute conversation after the episode, and he's like, he invited me to like, listen, if you ever come to Seattle, please reach out to me, and we're gonna go. We'll meet up in person. Like, this is
Right.
the guy who literally fought to bring frappuccinos to the market for one of the baristas. Like, he helped convince. And it's I haven't released this episode yet, but like you'll hear the story in my episode about how that happened. But like, so he's literally responsible for frappuccinos, and I'm like, he wants to have a cup of coffee with me and hang out with me in person. That's so cool. Like, so who knows if he does that for everybody, but
Yeah,
I still felt pretty special.
for sure. And it's crazy how it can evolve too. Because I recently had a guest, his Giles, his YouTube channel, and he does streams of video games, and he gets consistently 20,000 views per video. So he's like, he's got a pretty solid, dedicated
Mm-hmm.
audience. And he's like, "Are you sure you want me on here? I see these other guests that you've had. Like the fact that I've had like a lot of these giant influencers on the show, you know, you can like reference them, but then now it's like, in a way intimidating for some people. So I had to like, reassure him like, yes, like I want you on the show. You have a lot of value to share. And, but it's
Yeah.
over time it evolves. And I just recently started feeling some of that.
Well, you found, right, that person mastered their niche. And like, I think about like 5-6 years ago, where people were like, oh, this online gaming thing and online streaming and Twitch. And right, if you're like a parent, or even like me 5 years ago, we'd be like, why are they wasting all this time in front of like playing video games? But a lot of these people are making money and right, and getting sponsored and making an income off of this. And I'm like, people are out there bitching and moaning and complaining like they're not making a real salary, or they're like washing their brain away. I'm like, listen, if they're making 30, 40, 50, 60 grand a year doing something they love, and they're not harming someone, and they're like mastering their craft, who the hell are we to bitch and moan and complain and say that they're doing right or they're doing wrong?
Yeah. And
Right?
and they evolve over time. Like I've met multiple large Twitch streamers or gamers that, they start out just caring about games, but eventually they get older and then they start to realize like they want to make a bigger impact. They've got this audience. So I've
Right.
had a gamer on YouTube that does the FIFA, Capgun Tom. He's got over 1 million subscribers, and he's starting another YouTube channel talking about investing because he's
Wow.
never known about investing. That's completely unrelated, but now it's like he's got this confidence that he built this channel. He's got the audience he can reference, and that's not the first time I've seen that. So I think that
Right.
people can grow influence and then sort of shift over into the thought leadership side of
Well, and
things.
it's interesting. I would even say maybe for some people who maybe aren't, and we've spent a lot of time talking about, right, thought leaders and influencers when we were together on our retreat a few weeks ago, right? And what's the next step for them after that? But I'm thinking in my mind right now, the idea of like, if you are passionate about something, if you're the person for years has been making um, bath bombs, right, out of, right, the soap and the whatever that thing, make a YouTube video on that and become and showcase your hobby as, I'm not saying making bath bombs are weird, but even if it's a weird niche, right down the rabbit hole thing, and you become the person who teaches people how to do that, or teaches people about that, or and then you become an influencer. But you can always start off with like that one weird niche, and it doesn't have to be weird. I'm saying like weird that like people don't know about it, right? And put content out about that. You don't have to have this whole big platform first of like playing video games or being a thought influencer. Like you can just showcase what's unique about you, and
Right.
you're going to find other people doing that, and then you can build a leverageable pivot off of that. So I think right, you can go both ways in that regards.
Yeah, for sure. So we've been given a lot of advice
Yeah.
here. Um, I do. So I'm going to open the floor for you to talk more about your brand. And of course, I'm going to link everything on my website to you at whyinfluence.com on the episode page. But before I open the floor, knowing our audience, there's a lot of people that are struggling to start sharing or struggling to put their voice out there. What would be some of the last words that you have for the listeners here?
So for you and I think we've had a similar journey in the regards of like not knowing our inner power that can be brought out to the world by doing something that we absolutely love and enjoy doing. So whoever's out there, find right whatever that is. Like I was saying a few minutes ago, if you are really a fanatic about baseball cards, if you're a fanatic about Pokemon, if you're a fanatic about whatever it may be, a certain type of Billy Weems, who was editing my podcast and was working for Matt previously as his social media person, he has a whole YouTube platform on dreads and dreadlocks. And that was his, personal thing that he did. So again, don't be afraid to highlight what is absolutely completely unique about you, right? 20 years ago, people started book clubs because there's a book that they loved or a genre of books that they loved, and they would go and they would invite people over and they would have a book reading about it. This is what social media is now. What is your personal book club that you want to put out into the world? Whether it's a hobby or a type of food, or right, it could be anything. And just realize like your niche is what you're really curious about, what you're passionate about. And there will be people out there that do want to follow you, but don't be afraid to step up and put it out there, right? That vulnerability. And I think, I guess like for me, it's just one of the things that I heard at the podcast movement was how much time people spend editing their episodes, like hours and hours and hours. And I'm like, I don't care if I stutter. I don't care if I repeat a word 2 or 3 times. I don't care if I can't think about a question for 10 seconds and I go blank. I ain't editing crap out because this is who I am. And I probably do the same thing in my therapy sessions, and I don't get to edit my therapy sessions. So don't be afraid to just put out raw data to the world as well. And just be you, and like people will connect with that and people will follow that. And I think that's what maybe, helps me as a therapist in my private practice, where that's the platform I'm really in. I'm a therapist. And through that, I do coaching and integrative and alternative medicine and mindset. And I help people in their businesses, and I help people with their family stuff and their relationship stuff and their dating and their financial. It's really like your beliefs about what you believe is really where I'm really good in pattern interrupt and languaging and communication and how you people. I love calling out my clients. I'm like, you're using these words over and over again, and that alone is what's getting you stuck, is how you describe something. There's really no problem except for how you're describing it.
Right. Yeah.
So
Great advice, and that's so aligned with your why that we dug deep into earlier in the episode. So I think that's awesome that your last words are so in line with who you are. It's very authentic.
Well, the reason why I can do that is because I'm guilty of it myself. And I realized a year and a half ago that my goal is to be the type of therapist that I would want for myself. And I think that's really, truly what's happening for everybody, is that whatever product you're trying to create is that you're really trying to solve a problem for yourself. There's something I'm looking at for. That's why I'm looking down. There was a quote that I was trying to find here, but I might have deleted it. But I really do truly believe that what we're looking to create out there is what we need mostly ourselves, or a problem that we're trying to solve for ourselves. So find out what that is and then bring that out to the world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's so many people I talk to that's so true for. Well, Jason, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing a ton of value. We got so much advice and wisdom out of you, and it was awesome diving into your why. So thanks for letting me do that, and for you being vulnerable for that. So I'd like to open the floor for you to like maybe just share what's the best way someone can reach out to you and connect with you, and where do you want people to go follow or subscribe?
Sure. So the You Winning Life podcast, right, is my my voice for that. And that's on all platforms, You Winning Life. And if you can find it under You Winning Life, just type in my name, Jason Wasser, because I know sometimes on Spotify it's a little bit wonky. My private practice is called the Family Room Wellness Associates. And if you're if you're looking for therapy and you're in the state of Florida, I can legally do therapy in the state of Florida. There are things that I differentiate between what's therapy and what's coaching. So I work with people online, no matter where they are. And if they does turn into therapeutic issues, I will help them find a therapist locally, so we can kind of on the macro level say, like, here's the areas we need to work on, and here's the therapeutic stuff you should go get handled with someone else that's licensed in your state. You can go to the Family Room SFL, South Florida.com, or emotionalallergies.com will also lead you there. Instagram, Jason Wasser, LMFT, and the LMFT that you see streaming right here stands for Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist.
Awesome. Well, go check out Jason's podcast, You Winning Life. You Winning Life. If you just Google it, it'll come up. And not now, but in the coming weeks, there'll be an episode there with me on there. So if you wanted to just try out his podcast, it'd be a good way to start it out. But
it'll be a great way to start out, right? And to your podcast, your episode was awesome. I mean, there's so many good topics that we talked about, right? Those out there who are introverts, to how do you move, right? How do you tackle your introvert mentality to bring your voice to the world, which I think is such a cool topic. And I think, right, I would love to hear you more talk about that, and and help bring. I know that's one of your skills, to help people find their voice and their influence, right? That's the theme of this podcast. But I want to give you kudos, because we met almost, it will be a summer, this summer will be, well, we're still about a half a year out from that. Right. But, I've just seen you evolve since I first met you, and I'm so glad that our friendship's continuing, and we got to spend the weekend together in Nashville 2 weekends ago with you and Crystal and a few other people. But guys, also, like, I have no problem shamelessly plugging his podcast. So if you are not yet subscribed to the Why Influence podcast, do me a favor. Again, check it out. Check out Jeremy's stuff. And again, Jeremy, thank you so much for this opportunity to spend the day with you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks again for everything. So, once this episode's live, it's going to be on the website of whyinfluence.com, whyinfluence.com. Right now, it's live on Facebook and YouTube. So feel free to go check out the full episode there if you're just tuning in later. Otherwise, I'll put links and everything on the show notes, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Actually, before I let you go, I sometimes forget, I like to get feedback. Do you have any feedback for me, either on this podcast or how I am as a host, or anything positive or negative? I'm very open to constructive criticism. But
yeah, so I only have positive to share. One, because I've gotten to know you on a deeper level over the last number of months, and more specifically over the last couple of weeks. I love like I said earlier on in our conversation, the why under the why under the why under the why, the layering that you do. And I want to challenge you to not be afraid to keep poking.
Okay.
And, where you think you might got to a level and you're like, okay, I think that person's kind of okay there. See if there's something else underneath that, which you do. And you did really well with me, but I want you to not be afraid. And like right, the phrase that you use is giving yourself permission. See what happens if you go another layer.
All right.
And there might not be anything there. And you're like, okay, no, I'm kind of washed. I kind of hit that that's done. I hit that, but
all right, so try going until you hit like a wall, and then you're like, okay, we're there. So
right, and then
not assume that we made it.
Yeah, and again, you're doing amazing, right? It's not even a criticism. It's an enhancement to what you're already doing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, so no, it was very enjoyable, and like I feel like I could sit and do this with you for like hours and hours. We've been on for an hour and 14 minutes so far. So I've known it's been an incredibly enjoyable experience awesome. For me. So on my first live stream. So that was pretty cool.
Cool. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the live stream world.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
and I am wearing pants, which is good because I know we're all working from home. So.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, and thanks for tuning in today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. I'm sure we'll be talking and texting later on today as well at some point.
Sounds great.
All right. Ciao.